Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Greg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. You know, not too often in your lives you encounter a special person. And today's guest is really a special person, not just a nice person or a smart person or somebody that's done a lot for society and the planet, but just really a nice, special person. And rumors of this person started 50 years ago when people began talking about this young Cuban boy that was training squirrels and birds to eat from his hands. And people were amazed. Was this the first animal whisperer? I don't know. Maybe there was or there wasn't, but perfect attendance, first, elementary school, skips fourth grade, goes to my favorite public high school, my high school, Miami Palmetto Senior High School.
Well, you've done your research.
I did my research. A little bit of a blip. The next move was, became a Florida Gator. Okay.
A blip. That's the highlight, baby.
That's the highlight. I'm not so sure, Hurricane, University of Virginia, but we're processing it. Now you can't be perfect. Otherwise, special.
Nobody's perfect.
Special is not always perfect. All right. And then, you're just about to graduate and this special man decides to get out of Florida Gatorland and go and be the zookeeper at this new zoo, Miami Metro Zoo. Now,
actually, it began at the Crandon Park Zoo before Metro Zoo was open.
Okay,
so that's why I started at the Crandon Park Zoo in Key Biscayne.
And that I did not know. I did not know that Crandon Park had the zoo. But your father was not so thrilled about it. He warmed up to the idea finally, thankfully, because I know he had a big influence on your life. Now, how did I finally get to know you? Well, doing what any young, education-oriented boy would be doing. I would watch Sábado Gigante to see, the ladies dancing around in scantily dressed wear.
Yeah, that was a rough gig.
And there's this guy on the show, and he's talking about animals. And I'm like, there's a disconnect here. And I loved, you making fun of Don Francisco's English accent, him making fun of your Spanish accent. The next thing I know, I graduate from watching scantily dressed women to sports radio, and then there you are on Dan Le Batard's show. My favorite 1 hour segment on sports radio, bar none. And the best would be when you would mimic animal sounds amazingly.
Yeah,
so
it's all
here he is.
Stick, I guess.
Here he is, Ron Magill, still with Miami Zoo, the ambassador, world-renowned wildlife expert, photographer, conservationist. The man has been on America, The Late Show, CBS Morning, Dateline, CNN. I already told you about Sábado Gigante. He's been around the block. And, I thought, my God, what has this man not done? And the next thing I know, he's written a book. But
with the help of Greg Cody. I didn't write it by myself, but I had a co-author with me, Greg Cody. He did most of the writing. I kind of just told the story to him.
All right. So why don't we start there? Because that book came out a couple months ago.
Yeah. Let me tell you, I was, when I first proposed the book, I proposed it to Mitch Kaplan over at Books and Books.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most well-renowned book guys in the world. And I thought it was going to be a children's book. I wanted to tell the story of this lion cub, and I thought it was going to be a children's book, especially for kids who were adopted. And once you read the story, you'd understand why. And Mitch listened to it, and he referred me to a publisher, and the publisher loved the story and said, "No, you know what? This is more than a children's book. We'd like to do this book, but we'll only do it if you write about yourself too, kind of make it somewhat of an autobiography in the same way." I'd be honest with you, I was hesitant about that. I'm not very comfortable kind of telling the story of myself that way. I wanted to tell the story of the lion, but they said that's the deal breaker. And I said, well, you know what? If you're going to pay for it, you're going to pay me to do it. Okay, we'll do it that way. And that's what we did. So The Pride of a Lion came out a few months ago. And to my surprise, I wrote it with Greg Cody. He was really the writer on it. I told the story to Greg and he wrote it. To my surprise, it became an instant bestseller on Amazon. And then Amazon made it one of their editors' picks, which is really kind of That's a huge compliment because they get thousands and thousands of books every month and they only pick 10 editors' picks.
Right.
So I was very, very pleased with that. And the book has been selling very well. And it's been a real surprise to me. I've been going around and speaking to schools about it, telling the story, using the images. It's been a very positive connection for me, especially the kids, because kids, I tell them it's kind of like a modern day Lion King, but it's a true story. It's a real story. And I documented it and photographed it myself. So none of these things have been doctored. Nothing has been dramatized. Nothing has been exaggerated. It is factual. And I just did a presentation to the Carrollton School for Girls down here,
Yeah.
and girls in the audience were crying. So I guess it made quite an impact.
All right. So let's, Greg Cody, I'm like, all right, Greg Cody, sports writer. Like, tell me the story of how you got Greg,
Well,
a sports
yeah,
writer who was busy that year. It was a good year to be a sports fan in Miami land.
absolutely. We had the Heat going to the Final Four, to finals. We had the Miami Hurricanes going to the Final Four. We had Messi coming in, all that stuff with the soccer. I mean, it was blowing up. There's no question about that.
That's right.
They came to me, and I said, listen, I don't know if I'm comfortable writing this myself. Well, we'll get you a ghostwriter. I said, okay. I mean, what is a ghostwriter? I wasn't even familiar with what a ghostwriter was. And they said, we'll get you somebody, you tell the story and they'll kind of write it for you. I said, oh, okay, I can do that. And then that's when they said to me, hey, listen, you work with Greg Cody because we both on the Levitard show. And he said, Greg would be great. And now Greg and I are friends and we go back many years. And I love Greg's writing. Greg writes in a conversational way. It's not one of these grammatically perfect, correct ways like you're reading a textbook. He writes in a way that you feel like you talk. And, they said, why don't you ask Greg? I said, I'm not asking Greg. The guy's slammed. He's like the busiest guy in the world right now with all the sports stuff going on. And I wouldn't want to put that pressure on him because he's a friend. And I would feel like, oh my God, he might just say yes because he's a friend.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. And they said, well, we'll ask him. I said, you ask him, you make sure that it wasn't that I told you to ask him because I don't want him feeling that pressure. And they asked him, and then I got a call back and they said, Greg said he would love to do it. And I went, what? Are you kidding me? So I was really blown away by that. And then Greg and I worked together for, several months. I brought him out to actually meet the lion, who's now an adult father lion of himself, out at Lion Country Safari. And, had him over my house for some meals. And we just exchanged ideas back and forth. He recorded a lot of things that I said. We had some Zoom calls. And he wrote this book, and it's an easy book, Greg. You can read the book literally in one day if you set your mind to it. And I read it and I said, what? I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It's an easy read. I think it's an inspirational read. And obviously readers feel the same way because it's gotten very good reviews.
All right. So it's your story, but it's also the story of Quasi
the lion, the first male lion ever born at the zoo.
And this is Miami Zoo. How does that happen? How did that happen?
How did what happen? Did he get born here?
How are there lions at Miami Zoo? I mean, I'm thinking lions, Africa. I know about the lions.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, we've had lions here almost since the opening of the zoo. Listen, the zoo serves as a place that provides windows into the wild world. I've said this over and over, Greg. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need any zoos. In a perfect world, all of us would be able to travel to Africa to see lions walking on the Serengeti, travel to the Arctic to see polar bears on the ice, travel to the Amazon to see jaguars in the jungle. Unfortunately, most people aren't going to get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we're able to provide windows to create a connection for people to animals. And that's one of the important things that zoos do. I know as a kid growing up in New York City in a small apartment, my only connection to seeing real live wild animals was going to the Bronx Zoo. Yeah. And when I went to the zoo, that planted a seed in me. It grew into a really this passion that I have for wildlife. And I knew I always wanted to work with wildlife. Now, originally I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian until I took my first chemistry courses at the University of Florida. And I realized I got to come up with plan B because I wasn't going to get into veterinary school with those grades. Yeah. So, then I decided to go into wildlife conservation and ecology. And, the opportunity came to start working at the zoo as a zookeeper. And that's where I kind of made my dad very disappointed because I was the first kid in my entire family to go to college. My father formerly only had a third grade education, yet he was the smartest man I've ever known. But having said that, being the first one in your family to go to college, my father worked very hard to get me into college, to pay for it. And when I left in my senior year without graduating, that really, I could tell, very much disappointed my father. He made a comment to me that you're leaving the University of Florida to go shovel poop. I mean, that's what he said.
Yeah.
I said, no, Pop, it's more than that. You know, I gotta learn. I gotta get my foot in the door. I'm young here. I can get some experience, get to know people, get to work hand in hand with these animals that I admired for so many years. So that's, I did that. And fortunately, before my dad passed away, he was able to see my career start to expand a little bit and get a little notoriety that I'm sure he was very proud of. So it was okay. And then, unfortunately, it was after he passed away. But I always carried a chip on my shoulder because I left the University of Florida. I thought that the university had made an investment in me and accepting me to the school. The irony is today, if I were to apply to that school today, I would never get in because
Yeah.
the UF has become kind of like the Ivy League of the state. And I, I, I felt like I disappointed the school, I disappointed my family, that I never finished that degree. And then a couple of years ago, I got a call from the president of the university, President Fox at the time, and he said, Ron, I want to congratulate you. You've been selected to receive the Distinguished Alumnus Award. Now, this is Greg, I feel kind of, I don't know, uncomfortable saying this, but I will tell you, it's one of the most prestigious awards the university gives.
Yeah.
In its history since 1853, they've only given out 150 Distinguished Alumnus Awards.
Nice.
And for me to get that was, and I remember I talked to the president. And again, keep in mind, I've been carrying this chip on my shoulder for a long time that I never finished school there. And I told the president, I said, President Fox, you do know that I never graduated. I mean, I got 2-year degrees there, my associate's degrees, but I never got the bachelor's. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said something to me that took the monkey off my back in a way that I can't even describe. He said, son, your career is worth multiple degrees. And I'll never forget that. I don't know if the president has any idea how much that meant to me when he said it to me. But, I've since been invited to speak at the university. I was their commencement speaker. It was a very moving time for me. So I've kind of lived this fantasy life.
Yeah. Now I'm going to throw this little sidewinder at you here. What about you going back and finishing and getting your degree? Has that ever crossed your mind?
It comes to mind. I just wish I had the time.
You don't
I
have
mean,
the time now.
I just don't have the time. I've been, traveling significantly. I've got all kinds of different projects on the grill right now. And, maybe when I quote unquote retire, I'll go back and finish it.
All right. No, it sounds
If they let me go back in, I don't know.
Now, I know there's all these online courses or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you might have to pass the test or whatever. And that might be a little embarrassing if you're SAT.
There you go.
It just
There you go.
lead up to it or whatever. But I'm looking at all these online courses myself, and I'm saying I think that it's possible that I could go back and actually study and learn the stuff that I really wanted, accounting 101. I actually wish I had paid attention. It could probably be helpful in my life or whatever. But we'll move. Let's get back to the book a little bit. I don't want to give the story away because it's a great story, but it's your story. It's also Quamsi. Am I getting the name?
Quasi.
All right. So what's so special about this?
Well, Quasi was the first male lion born at the zoo. He was the only lion in the litter to first-time mother Asha. And because he was the only lion in the litter, lions normally have anywhere between 2 and 6 cubs.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to stimulate enough milk production in her, and he wasn't getting enough milk, and we had to supplement him. He went through some very serious infections where we thought he was going to die several times. It was really a roller coaster of emotions that was getting a lot of media attention here. People were, ecstatic when he was born, couldn't wait to see him, and then I was informing the media, listen, he's very sick. We don't know if he's going to make it. So it was back and forth and back and forth. And finally, he did pull through, and we were able to introduce him to the public. But then he faced, a huge tragedy. And I'm not going to give it away, but let's just say he faced a huge tragedy that really called in question his survivability. And the story is how he met those challenges, how his family, the pride of lions, helped save his life, and how he eventually became an incredible alpha male on a pride of his own to have his own cubs. So it's a wonderful, real Lion King story.
And without giving anything away from the book, can you tell us how old he is?
He is now 9 years old, almost 10 years old.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years old now. Yeah. He's absolutely stunning lion. He lives at Lion Country Safari with his own pride.
That's interesting. So tell me a little bit about Lion Country Safari. I mean, what do they do? And
listen, Lion Country Safari is a great institution in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach. And, it's more of a drive-through park. you drive through, you don't really walk through like you're walking through a zoo, and you drive through and you're going through these open plains where you have, a herd of zebras, herds of oryx, crashes of rhinos. I mean, there's a group of white rhinos out there, ostrich. So it's really kind of a drive-through park. And then you'll get to see the lions. You don't get to drive into the lion enclosure. It used to be that way. When they first opened, you could actually drive in with the lions. But I think risk management said we can no longer do that.
Yeah.
And it's, though it's safe to go in there with in your vehicle with your windows closed, unfortunately, people today are doing things that are less than intelligent, just to get pictures for their social media. They get the clicks, and unfortunately, social media has made a lot of people very stupid.
Yeah.
So, in order to protect themselves, they have to now forbid people from driving into the thing, because there's going to be that idiot who wants to roll down his window to take a picture with a lion behind him.
Yeah. Well, and when they go to Africa, I think they do the same things, but
Exactly.
the way to survival of the fittest, right? That includes.
There you go.
So Quasi, when was the last time you saw Quasi?
Kind of about 4 or 5 months ago now.
Yeah.
Up there to Lion Country Safari to see him.
How was that experience for you?
It was fantastic. I went there with Greg. We both went up there together.
Yeah.
Haley, who's the PR director there at Lion Country, is the wonderful young lady, gave us a special privilege of actually driving into the pen with him. Haley drove us in there, and to be able to look at Quasi literally 6 feet in front of me, this majestic, just stunning lion. He's really one of the most beautiful lions I've ever seen. And to think about how he almost died several times as a cub, it's a very, very moving experience.
All right. So just the whole concept of zoos and, keep preserving species, conserving, trying to keep species alive. Are there times when you can reintegrate an animal from the zoo back into the wild?
Greg, listen, there are times that has happened, but that is by far the exception as opposed to the rule. If any zoo is coming out there trying to tell you, well, we're having these animals under human care so that we can reintroduce them to the wild, they're not being very truthful with you. Now, having said that, that had been successfully done with several species of animals that, in fact, saved those species from extinction. What immediately comes to mind is the California condor. Were it not for zoos breeding California condors, they'd be extinct today. Today, you can go to the Grand Canyon and see California condors flying over the Grand Canyon, and every one of those condors is directly related to a zoo animal. Yeah. So this is a huge success story. Same thing with Arabian oryx. Same thing with black-footed ferrets. There are several species that we have been able to reintroduce to the wild. But having said that, the overwhelming majority of them that you see in zoos today could never be reintroduced to the wild. Yeah. When we have marked an animal for reintroduction to the wild, it takes a whole different aspect on how we raise it, how that animal is presented, making sure we don't have connections to human beings, because we don't want to have any bond that way. It's a tremendous expense, a tremendous effort to raise an animal that's going to be for that purpose alone, to be reintroduced to the wild. So zoos serve as an insurance policy against a very uncertain future in the wild for animals that could be extinct. And then if we have the need, we can then start raising animals under human care with the goal of releasing them to the wild. But what you're seeing in zoos today, those animals are never going to go back to the wild.
All right. So 6 years before you became a zookeeper, the Endangered Species Act was passed 50 years ago. So it's the 50-year celebration of this act, which is under, regulatory problems
right.
from prior administrations. I don't know how that's going to play out, but I would imagine during those 44 years that you've been involved in this industry, you've seen some endangered species in South Florida, maybe even at your zoo. Give me some stories, success, failure, maybe things that are sort of still going.
I think the greatest success story for the Endangered Species Act is on one of the most iconic animals in our country. It's our national symbol, the bald eagle.
Yeah.
The bald eagle in the 70s was an endangered species. Numbers plummeting. DDT had pretty much wiped it out. Endangered Species Act comes along, they take DDT off the market. Bald eagles today are commonly seen. As a matter of fact, in the state of Florida, there are more bald eagles than any other state in the country except for Alaska. And they're commonly seen throughout the country in various areas. So that's a classic example of an animal, our national symbol, that was on the endangered species list, and because of the Endangered Species Act, can now be commonly seen flying throughout our state. Another classic example, not necessarily an animal that is endearing to a lot of people, but certainly iconic, is the American alligator. It's another animal on the endangered species list, almost wiped out. Same thing with the crocodile. Now American alligators are so numerous, there's actually a hunting season
It's
for
a
them
hunting season.
to keep those numbers in balance.
Yeah.
And people will ask me, Ron, gosh, how could you ever support a hunting season? I mean, you're an animal lover, right? Well, listen, I want to be totally transparent with you. I do love animals, and I believe animals should be treated with respect. Everything should be done humanely when you're working with animals. I don't go to certain fast food restaurants and stuff because I don't believe in the way they acquire their meats. But at the same time, people say, well, how do you support a hunter? Like, do you agree with deer hunters? Listen, if it were not for deer hunters out there helping to control the populations of deer because of the fact that we've wiped out the natural predators, we don't have the wolves, we don't have the mountain lions that we had in the numbers before, we would have a real problem. Deers would be starving, disease would be passed through. We need those hunters to keep that balance. Plus, the hunters that are hunting deer and eating the deer, I have no problem. Greg, I go to Publix, I'll eat a steak every now and then. I'm trying to cut back on my red meat, but I eat meat, I eat fish, I eat chicken. I want to try to ensure that it's being humanely sourced, that these animals are at least being treated respectfully in life. I'll pay a little bit more for free ranging for that. But I think that's something morally I'm obligated to do. But I don't want to be a hypocrite and say, oh, I don't do anything that would hurt an animal. I think it's part of the circle of life. I do believe that. So, when we talk about hunters, the ethical hunter is sometimes one of the best conservationists that you can imagine. If it weren't for duck stamps today, if it weren't for hunting licenses, many of these beautiful conservation areas would be gone. They'd be developed. Okay, it's those hunters that want to protect those natural areas to make sure that their kids and their future generations can have the same experience of the outdoors, of hunting for subsistence, for eating. Now, these guys who want to go out just to hang a head on their wall, I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, no. I actually went to somebody's house. I went to a party, and the homeowner was showing everybody his beautiful house, and then we walked into his room, and he had all these heads on. I was like, I was so stunned. I actually had, I mean, besides being at Teddy Roosevelt's place in Long Island, right. I never really experienced that. All right, what about the manatee? How is the manatee doing?
Manatee, it's kind of been a roller coaster with the manatee. The manatee right now, last year there was some severe suffering going on because of the seagrass die-offs.
Yeah.
They were manatees that were starving to death. They face all kinds of challenges. We always hear the challenges of the boaters that run them over, boat strikes, things like that. If we have these extreme cold streaks, they get cold stunned, they can be severely affected by that. But what's really hurt them tremendously in the past few years has been these seagrass die-offs where they're not getting enough food, they're not getting enough nutrition, and it's been causing a really big hit on their numbers. Seagrass beds in some areas now seem to be recovering, but there's others where they're not, and I don't know if we know exactly why this is happening. Yeah. But the manatee is kind of like a canary in the coal mine as far as the health of the bay goes and the health of the seagrass. So I think the Endangered Species Act has certainly protected the manatee. Were not for the Endangered Species Act, they would be in much more severe, condition than they are right now. But they still face some severe challenges in the sense that their habitat, their ecosystem, is what's being threatened right now by pollution, by all this fertilizer runoff, all kinds of situations, algae blooms that are causing these seagrass die-offs that can be catastrophic.
Yeah, actually, one of my first cases as an attorney was an environmental case. We were challenging the Florida Keys, their comprehensive land use plan, and I was a young lawyer. I didn't know what I was doing, but there was a man, Richard Grosso, maybe you know the name. He had so many environmental groups that he was representing, and I had started this nonprofit group called the Clean Miami River, and he knew that. And he's like, Greg, you got to help me out. Take some of these lunatic clients off my hands or whatever. So one of my issues, I had hurricane evacuation. They got too many people, they can't evacuate them. They wanted to expand the roads, but that kind of just didn't really do that, I don't think. But one of the issues that we had was near the seagrass is dying off. And we had hired an expert from Georgia, I'm not sure what his name was, but basically what he had done was he was tracing, like, from the time he flushed the toilet, how long it took the pathogen to reach the nearest shore. So that's what we were saying, that the septic systems were inadequate. They were going to kill off the seagrass, which was going to kill off the tourist industry and the fish. And, great, what are you going to do then? All right.
And that's a really important point. A lot of people think that, this is all just these tree huggers and bunny huggers that care about this. It's not just that, Greg. Like you pointed out, tourism is an economic engine of this state. People
Yeah.
come here to fish. They come here to see the manatees. They come here to see these natural wonders that we have. We start losing them. We start losing those tourism dollars. It's going to start affecting the people who don't give a darn about animals in their pocket, and then they're going to pay attention.
Yeah. And a lot of them love fishing. So,
Absolutely.
what are you going to fish? You want to go to the coral reefs? You better watch out. Anyway, all right, that's a side story. But all right, another two questions just from things that you just said now. Okay, DDT, like I hear DDT and the bald eagle, and I'm thinking, wasn't that the Sackler family? Didn't they invent DDT or come up with that? The same family that's up with the opiates and running crazy after.
You may be right, but I'm not sure. You may be right, but I'm not sure. And the opiates are another huge problem. They're finding out how many people flush opiates down the toilet and they end up in the bay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
Oh man. All right. So now one thing that I was scratching my head about many years ago, but I still, for those in the audience that don't really understand, like the gray wolves being reintroduced out west, and they're the apex, and they, like with the hunters and all that. How does that work that you're reintroducing like the top of the food chain, and somehow or another that helps out the rest of the food chain and the habitat and all that? It sounds counterintuitive because they're going to be eating the next guy in line.
No, what it does is it weeds out the sick and the infirmed. Okay, the wolves don't hunt the fittest animal in the herd. If they're going to take out elk, if they're going to take out deer, they're going to take out bison. They're going to take out the weakest ones in the herd. That's basically keeping a balance of the healthiest animals. That helps the survival of the fittest pass on to the next generation. People don't understand how important these apex predators are in weeding out the weak, getting that weak gene out of the population to keep the population healthy. That's something that we've seen now in a lot of deer populations where they're getting sick. You got all these Lyme disease being spread all over all kinds of issues. It's because we've lost those predators to keep that in balance. So the wolves play a very important part. Now I know there's a huge controversy because the ranchers are saying, they're going after our cattle now, and that's an expense. So there's going to have to be a compromise there. Greg, one thing I say over and over again, extremism in any form is dangerous. We've got to learn to compromise. We've got to learn to coexist. I understand the ranchers losing head of cattle is expensive to them. So we're going to have to come up with some kind of compensation system to help compensate them when it's a loss for something that can be proven as a result of wolves. We do that in Africa with things like cheetahs. We work with a compensation scheme with the ranchers, so they're reimbursed. We are doing that now here in Florida with the Florida panther. We are working with ranchers. There's a very well-known gladesman named Alligator Ron Bergeron, and what he does is, if you can prove to him a panther killed your cattle, he will reimburse you. He'll give you money to kind of compensate for that loss. These are the types of things we're going to have to do. I don't have any, sure formula that says, okay, we're 40% of this, 50%. No. We're going to have to work it out. But we got to talk. We can't just say, no, you can't have any wolves here at all. That's not going to happen. Or you can't have any panthers here. Or no, you've got to pay me all of what this is worth if one of your animals takes it out. There's got to be a compromise. We got to look down the line and say, what's best for the environment, for our future, for our kids, not just for what's in our pocket right now.
All right. Speaking of the Panthers, I remember probably 20 years ago, first reading about the Panthers. There was 30 Panthers left, and then they introduced, I think, the Texas Cougars.
Texas Cougars, yeah.
Right. So that was sort of an experiment in crossbreeding. I mean, so what? I never heard anything since then. Has it been?
It's been a huge success. There's now estimated to be around 200 panthers in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
That Texas gene was able to kind of dilute the inbreeding challenges that were being created with only having 20 cats, 20, 30 cats in a population. Now, it's also created a little bit of controversy, because the controversy is, the Texas cougar is not an endangered species. Western mountain lion is not an endangered species. The Florida panther is an endangered species, but now the purists are saying, well, is it now a Florida panther anymore because you've introduced this Texas blood? And I will tell you, my personal opinion is that it has been listed as a subspecies of the cougar. what it is, it's just a geographical subspecies. You know, this is a Western cougar that has adapted to a geographical area and to the prey available in that area. The mountain lions and cougars in the West are big and strong because they're feeding on elk, they're feeding on ram, they're feeding on big hoof stock. Okay, the Florida panther is feeding on wild pigs, raccoons, possums, smaller deer.
Yeah.
So it is a smaller cat. It's just, you know, generations of adaptation to the prey species that they're eating. Does that mean that, oh, it shouldn't be protected anymore? Absolutely not. I think by protecting the panther, you're protecting very critical habitat for many other species. You're protecting the heritage of this great state. And that's what we need to do, because, Greg, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see how developers are just mowing over things here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening from Tallahassee south, that the state is becoming this place where people say, oh my God, this is a gem of a place to live, and we all want to live there, and developers are mowing down things. You know, I worked with an organization called the Florida Wildlife Corridor. We just did a documentary about it.
Nice.
How important it is to connect these wild areas so these animals have a corridor to go up the state, because these animals are directly connected to our quality of life. No matter what you say, by protecting these animals, we're protecting ourselves.
Now, I thought I saw that they did pass legislation to, you know, basically do what you're talking about with the wildlife corridor
Yes.
out West Florida. So that did go through.
It did go through. They got significant funding to help support the maintenance and development of that corridor.
Okay, well, that sounds great. Now, when I think about like the Florida, the panther and the Texas cougar, you know, my initial thought was this was going to be, forget about whether it's a subspecies or, you know, you're a purist and you're trying to, you know, oh, we got a victory here. To me, it sounds like a healthier result. It's almost like, if, you know, do you want a purebred dog or do you want a mutt? I mean, if you want a healthier dog, you're going to go with the mutt. You know,
absolutely.
As a guy, as an Ashkenazi Jew, I know that, you know, my heritage has got some issues too, right? You know, like, let's go out to the desert and find somebody. All right.
Well, look, you know, look in a lot of ways, you know, not necessarily now, but generations ago, the royal family, you know, these were not the healthiest of people, because they kind of kept everything in the family, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds good, but I don't know. You know, maybe it doesn't work out. All right, now I want to shift gears a little bit, because the rumor mill was that you were in trouble. I heard, oh my God, Ron Magill, he's speaking out, and you know, the Zoo Miami water park, everybody was so excited about it. Even you were excited about it. And then you put your livelihood and your reputation at risk. What happened?
Well, let me correct you. I would have put my reputation at risk if I didn't do anything, because what happened was, you know, our own conservation team went out there and discovered species that we did not know existed in these pine rocklands surrounding this parking lot area. And then we discovered how they utilize that parking lot at night as a critical foraging area for their survival. I mean, whether it be bats, whether it be butterflies, whether it be the beetles, these endangered species that live nowhere else, just right here. You know, that were discovered after the initial vote for the water park. I'll make it clear, I voted for the water park in the beginning. I said, no, I think this will be a great idea. You know, this was before we had this nightmare of traffic and everything now on 152nd Street, but I voted for the water park. I was actually on a phone tree calling citizens saying, hey, you know, vote for this thing, it's great. And we passed it.
Yeah.
That was in 2016. Now, since then, we discovered these species. We discovered how they use this thing. And I said, hey, we can't do this anymore. Look what we found out. And, you know, the argument back to me was, oh, it's already been passed. There's nothing you can do about it. I go, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You know, it's like, you remember that chemical Roundup that people used to use for weed killer?
Of course.
Okay. Well, that was great. Everybody used it for weed killer. And then they found it afterwards, after it was already approved, this thing causes cancer. Okay. There are chemicals in here. Monsanto was in all kinds of trouble because of this stuff.
They
took it off the market. Yeah, it's gone. They took it off the market because they realized this is bad. Well, I use that as an analogy to say, this is bad for these animals. So then we had people, including my bosses, telling me, you can't do that. There's no way you can claim critical habitat where there's a parking lot. I go, that's wrong. Yes, you can. And they said, well, you're forbidden from talking about it. And when I heard that, I said, okay, you can forbid me from talking about it as Ron Magill from Zoo Miami, but you can't forbid me from my freedom of speech as Ron Magill, private citizen. And I wrote a pretty detailed letter to all the media here, and I signed it Ron Magill, private citizen. Now, listen, Greg, I'm not stupid. I'm not kidding myself. I've been here for 44 years at the zoo. They knew who Ron Magill was, even though I signed it as private citizen. And that kind of opened Pandora's box.
Yeah.
It's like Ron Magill's going against the county because at that time it was the parks director, the zoo director. I said, "Oh, this is good for the zoo. We're going to have this. We support it." And I said, "No, I don't support it. This is bad for the zoo. And let me tell you why." And I went as far as to say the zoo is being hypocritical if they're saying they're a conservation organization and they're not protecting this critical habitat.
Yeah.
I'm very proud to say the Zoo Miami Foundation, when they were given all the information, their board voted unanimously to go against the water park.
Nice.
Okay. And, our director of animal health, our chief veterinarian, our director of conservation, they went with me when we did a rally in front and protested against this thing. But listen, I'm not going to kid myself. There was a target on my back, and they were all hoping that it would never, my protest wouldn't work. But I went in front of the commission. I made a bunch of statements. I met with every commissioner. I wrote all kinds of letters. I went on every television program I could go on. Make a long story short, the mayor turned around 180 degrees and she rescinded the lease, and it's a dead deal now.
Nice.
And what that does, Greg, I'll tell you, for me, it's one of the highlights of my 44-year career here. But more importantly, I think what it demonstrated to people was that when the people lead, the leaders will follow.
Yeah.
Because I was told by everybody, "You're crazy. This is never going to happen. The developers have, these major lobbyists. They got everything paid for down in Tallahassee. This has already been a done deal. It's a signed deal." I said, well, and I didn't expect to win. But what I said in the beginning when you asked the question, I would have had no self-respect had I said nothing, because to be silent would have been complicit. I tried to establish myself as a conservationist, as someone standing up for wildlife in this county, and if I didn't say anything about it, I would be a hypocrite. So I said to myself, and I met with my wife. I said, "Honey, listen, I want you to know, I'm probably not going to have a job, but at least I'm going to have my self-respect." Yeah. I said, "They're probably going to find out a way to fire me or push me out or whatever. But at least I leave with my head held high, because, Greg, when you do the right thing, it's the right thing. It feels right inside of you. When you do the wrong thing, it's the wrong thing because you're always trying to come up with excuses as to why you're doing it. I didn't have to come up with any excuses."
I want to say this, sometimes getting fired is the best thing for your aspirations. You're no longer held back. You don't even realize how you're like conforming to whatever structure it is that your employer wants you. But you're there. I'm not telling you to go get fired or whatever.
No, no.
If you were freed, you would be going off even beyond where you've gone at this point. I want to circle back to the bison, because when we're talking about wildlife corridor, I read a really interesting article recently about some Indian tribes that were basically trying to do the same project for the bison. Now, first of all, I thought the bison had been wiped out. I thought there was no more buffalo, but I obviously am wrong. So what do you think about that topic?
Well, the bison is the national mammal of the United States. And it is kind of like the iconic poster child of what can happen when we don't protect species. I mean, there were millions of them that used to roam the plains, Greg, and they were literally wiped out. The only founder stock, the only original herd that has been there since the beginning of time is what you see in Yellowstone National Park. Yeah. Now, since then, they've got some satellite herds in Montana, different areas that people have private breeders, but they have become a symbol of the Wild West. And their ability to maintain the plains, their ability to fertilize, they produce a lot of manure, and they pass a lot of seeds. They spread a lot of seeds. They play an integral part in the health of the American West. So, that breeding program that was started actually by the Bronx Zoo, the Wildlife Conservation Society, in the Bronx Zoo, New York, are one of the founders of the captive breeding of bison that were reintroduced to the wild, that now have this wonderful population that people can see on a regular basis. So it's a success story as to about when you focus on something about conservation, you can make it happen.
Yeah. Now, as a Miami Dolphin, Buffalo Bills or whatever, but I'm with you 100%, 110%.
But the ironic thing is, they're, like you said it correctly in the beginning, they're bison. They're not buffalo.
Not buffalo. Yeah. All right. Well, this part of this program is educational. All right. So there you go. All right. So now I know, doing my little research before the program, I saw that you had a nice little event about invasive species.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Pythons. What's going on with pythons? Talk to me about the highlights of that seminar.
The pythons are just the poster child for a much bigger problem. The pythons were great because they got people's attention. Why? Because most people are afraid of snakes. They hate snakes. So they pay attention when they hear about big, massive snakes now supposedly slithering all over South Florida. Having said that, though they're definitely a big problem, we have other very big problems in the state from invasive species. People don't understand. I describe South Florida as kind of the Ellis Island of exotic animals because so much comes in here from international trade for the pet trade or whatever, comes in through Miami. Those animals that come in through New York, or come in through Detroit, if they escape there or they're released in New York or Detroit, the first winter, they're dead.
Yeah.
Okay? They escape here in Miami and they're in Club Med. And that's the difference. They thrive here. They find each other, they start reproducing, and we've seen, the consequences of those mistakes now in pythons. We've seen it in so many other reptiles. There are more non-native lizards in Florida now than there are native lizards. Everything from these massive iguanas and these spiny tails and these agamas now that people see all over, the orange-headed agamas from Tanzania running all over the place, chameleons. It's incredible the variety of non-native species here. And though not all of them are what we call invasive, they're all non-native and have the potential to become invasive. And people need to understand what the difference is between exotic and invasive. An exotic animal is an animal that was introduced here, but is not native, but to date has not been proven to be detrimental to any native species or to the environment. An invasive species is a species that's been introduced here, but now has proven to be detrimental to native species, either by outcompeting them or destroying habitat for them or native to the environment. So, you have things like iguanas. Iguanas are now invasive. Why? Because they destroy habitat. They eat every flower, every bush, everything. And they will compromise things like seawalls. They'll dig tunnels under asphalt and roads and compromise roads. They cause all kinds of problems that way, not to mention the fecal matter they spread around your pool, around your house, and all kinds of stuff like that. Look about lionfish. This is an animal that could be catastrophic in what it can do to the fishing industry and wiping out fish along the reef. Again, started as a fish tank specimen, released either by aquarists or also in the bilges of ships. That when they clear their bilges, they bring these things across the ocean. So this is a huge issue now. And then we're not even talking about some of the plants, the Melaleuca trees that are all up and down the Florida Turnpike that were purposely planted to soak up the water because they wanted to develop the swamp, right? And now we realize, oh my God, how detrimental this is. This is ruining the Everglades. We're paying millions and millions of dollars each year to try to get these Melaleuca out of there. Insects. People complain when you go through USDA, when you land from a foreign country, they say, listen, if you walked on a foreign ranch, you bring in any insects or anything, one egg-laden insect coming into our crop industry here, whether it be avocados, mangoes, corn, whatever, could wipe out a crop and become such an infestation it cost us millions of dollars. So this exotic invasive species problem in Florida is a big one. It's going to cost us millions, if not billions more moving forward, and people need to be real careful with what they do with their animals.
All right. Is there anybody that you know of that you think might be able to help? Invasive species. Is there
a lot of people do. A lot of people. There's a lot of scientists working on this. We've got so many people. Again, not to give it a shameless plug, but the University of Florida has a group of scientists that are all working on this invasive species thing, as I'm sure the University of Miami does too. So there's a lot of organizations that are working together to try to humanely remove these animals. But listen, I'm going to be honest with you. We're never going to get rid of all the pythons. That's never going to happen. I think pythons are here forever, short of some kind of species-specific pandemic, some biological thing that would attack these things, a parasite that would be just for the pythons and kind of wipe them out that way. They're here forever. The question is, how do we manage it to the best of our ability so the numbers don't explode?
Yeah, no, it's frightening. And I see the iguanas everywhere, and I'm just, I'm almost like, I wouldn't say hopeless, but I tried, with the pythons, I did one of the hunts. Speaking of hunting, I never hunted in my life. I used to go try to fish with my friend. And,
wasn't easy to find any pythons, was it?
Well, I'll just say this: in the 4 years that I spent with my best friend in high school fishing in right around Palmetto High School, whatever, I never caught a fish, and so he gave me the nickname Fish but I still had fun or whatever.
Sure.
So we all went out. We said, all right, now we're 40 or whatever. Let's go hunt. Let's do these python hunting things or whatever. So we went out there. I didn't see one python. I was like so disappointed or whatever. So I just
and Greg, the point being is there's probably over 100,000 pythons out in the Everglades.
yeah,
And I promise you, you probably walked by one and just never saw it. They
just
blend in with their environment so well.
yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, I was with my buddy and I said, well, why don't we do like a Netflix series called The Jewish Python Hunters? And we were just the shows coming out there all the time and going, you know, walking right by the pythons or whatever. But you know, it's just one of my great ideas that I just don't have enough time for. So, but you know, maybe down the road. Okay. So I know I had you on maybe 6-7 months ago, and I really gave short. I didn't get into your conservation endowment to the level that I should have. So I want to end the show. Talk to me about the endowment. What does it do? Give me some stories. I know I heard about Professor Hallett. Talk to me what it actually is.
Well, you know, when I started to work here 44 years ago, I didn't come to work here to work for an attraction. As I've said over and over again, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need any zoos. I came here to work for an institution that was going to do things to protect animals in the wild where they belong. I would go as far as to say if the zoo is the last place that we can see the animals you have here today, then zoos have failed in what should be their number one priority, and that is to protect animals in the wild in their native habitat. When I started here at the zoo, I just didn't think we were doing enough of that. We were spending millions of dollars building these new exhibits, but we weren't allocating enough funding to help protect those animals in the wild. So out of frustration, I wanted to create an endowment. And an endowment, you're an attorney, you're very familiar with what it is, but for your listeners, it's basically creating a corpus of money that gets invested, that you don't touch. It's kind of like a pension plan, you see. Because one of the big challenges when working in conservation is sustainability. You raise money, you spend it, and then you got to raise again, and you got to raise again. But if you can raise a nice chunk of money, invest it, and then just spend the dividends, you have sustainability moving forward. And that's what I wanted to do. But I knew I had to raise at least $1 million to do that.
Yeah.
And listen, Greg, I'm a zookeeper. I've never seen $1 million in my life. Okay. But fortunately, through people I've met over the years, people who have been very successful, very affluent, I was able to raise $1 million. And to date now, I have almost $3 million in that endowment. And the money from that endowment cannot be spent at the zoo. It can only be spent in protecting animals in the wild where they belong, or providing scholarships for people seeking careers in wildlife conservation. And I'm very proud to say that every year I give away tens of thousands of dollars. And listen, if I leave this podcast and die the minute I walk out the door, that endowment will continue to give money in perpetuity because of the way I've established it. You know, people have always asked, Ron, what do you want your legacy to be? You know, I don't want my legacy to be the guy who went on television with animals. I wanted my legacy to be the guy who had the forethought to provide funding to help protect these animals so that his kids, their kids, and their kids after that will be able to see them in the wild where they belong. Because again, as much as I believe in the cause of a zoo and what we do in providing these windows to plant seeds and kids coming here, I want to make sure that these animals can live in the wild where they belong. And that's what the endowment does. And I'm very fortunate that the Zoo Miami Foundation took it under their umbrella. So people can donate to the endowment through the foundation. It's a total tax deduction. And I guarantee you your money, your actual money will never get spent because it goes into the corpus. But it adds to the dividend producing that then, you know, so what you're doing is you're not donating, you're investing. You're investing in nature by doing that.
Yeah, and you're playing with house money. So that's
exactly. That's
the best. All right, we're going to end it right here. Ron, if you were here with me right now shaking my hand, you'd be like, Greg, why are you sweating? Why is your palm sweating? Well, that's because I have hyperlordosis or something. I don't know, some cockamamie disease, illness or whatever, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. All right, this is a special guy, Ron Magill. All right, I'm not going to go through his whole background, but I will end on this note. All right. If your father's listening, you're a fundraiser as well. All right. You're an author. You did write a book. All right. Your father didn't give you all that, all those talents he didn't see down the road or whatever. And you are the tallest Cuban. So
world's tallest Cuban. That's true.
Paul Castronovo. And, you know, sounding off to young Ron Brewer. I know he died recently. And,
rest in peace, Ron.
May you rest in peace. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. I will beg this guy to come back at some point in the future. So you let me know what questions you want me to ask, and I will do that on Cut to the Chase. Ron, you go get him. Have a good day, and we'll speak again, all right?
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you very much.
All right.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.